Good. I did find my missing slide from this morning, or before lunch that I was looking for. And we had our small discussion on the term appropriate and its overuse within proposals. And I had a made-up word for appropriate, which means pertaining to the overuse of the term appropriate in a proposal when the guidelines call for measurable outcomes and objectives. I.e., what I say is the reader doesn't have the foggiest idea what they need to do, so they use appropriate in there. And to the point, I've seen a sentence that said, the director will take appropriate measures to seek appropriate levels of support for the delivery of appropriate services. Which doesn't say anything. So we want to, check that word, those conclusions or assumptions, and I'm using the word appropriate and what that really means. The appropriate level of support really doesn't answer the question how much support is really needed. Appropriate action doesn't really say what that action is, so we have to be careful on how much we use that term and word. And we look at, what was used to prove the need? Well, for example, statistics, and those are always a good one to cite. If we're looking at the reason we're putting computers in a school, for example, maybe, not 100% of students don't have books, so there's a reading and literacy problem, or the number of teachers or experts that worry about literacy, or the number of students eligible for special services because they don't have books. Finding some kind of reference point or where you found that information to back up your claim on saying, children don't have books. That's why we want to put a computer lab to improve reading and literacy. Well, according to the statistics, 100% of children in this rural island area don't have books. They don't have access to books. Well, there's a statistic backing up your claim that you made by that they don't have books and the approach that you're taking. And for a reference on the impact of reading on young students and how it helps them, and without books, they're not getting the benefit of that impact. Or that it causes, by not having books or good reading skill, it causes post-school problems. Children fight more, or some statistic that supports your ideas. So how do we formalize and organize that need statement? We talked about what goes in it. We don't want to make assumptions. We want to be clear and concise. So we kind of want to write that need statement to go from what I'll call the foundational statement, or this idea we have and what we want to do with it. And going from that statement to, build the case of, with the data, with your experience, with your, not assumptions, but actual real information that you can back up or cite. So go ahead and build your case. And then, of course, all of that keeping in mind what's the guidelines of the granting agency, and make sure that the case you're building fits within what their goals and objectives are. And I've been repeating myself all the last day and a half. Follow the guidelines, understand them, read them, follow them. And then be succinct, be clear, but be persuasive, because you are selling a story, you are selling your idea and how you're going to do this. What I learned early on was, in my writing, my passion for a topic didn't come out. My passion why I wanted to do this didn't come out. And it really, I wasn't making a persuasive argument because the reader didn't feel my passion for that topic and how I felt about it, and why it was so important to do this. So be succinct, clear, concise, and make sure that you're persuasive. And for me, that really means, where's your passion for building your case for what you want to do?
When you're building yourself out.
just right, but there's a way to write where people can feel that, well, they're excited about this, they're passionate, and they really want to make this happen. So you want to tell your story and build your case around that, have your logical conclusions, and what this leads into then is you can build up your project goals and objectives. So it is telling a story, it is being persuasive, having your passion about it. And being in the journalist industry that you are in, you understand that, but coming from the IT world, that's hard to do at times. It's not the easiest thing for us to do. So, we've talked a lot about this problem statement. Well, how do you end it? What's the piece to end it? Well, you want to emphasize the significance of the project, what the results will be. So what's here's the problem, here's our idea, here's the problem, here's the supporting statistics or skill base we have in that area, then what do we really see is the significance, and part of that significance is what do we see as the results? What impact should it have, or will have? And will that impact continue? Is it, what's the time frame of that impact? You might be able to present your ideas a model. If it's something you're putting out there as a pilot and saying, we're going to show that this will work, and hope, as a model for more locations to take advantage of and learn from what we've done. But always address the priorities of the funding agency and put it back into their context, because they're the ones reading it with their context in mind. And if you follow that in your ending statement, then and saying, well, and this is how it ties back to the goals of your program. And sometimes it helps to talk about the usefulness or the importance of the results. Not just for that project, but maybe there's that information and that results can be used by others. In the case of, like the work that we're doing in Chuck, our whole goal is to put a model out there on how to put computer labs in schools cost effectively, train the teachers effectively, to excite the Department of Education to do more. And, because they had a couple big pilots that were failures, and we're trying to show them a new way of doing it that could be a success. And so, we're forecasting the usefulness and importance of the results that, making the conclusion that, they'll find it useful, that they'll find these results thought-provoking enough that they'll want to go ahead and do more schools with that model. The challenge is, is that information available, on the internet for people to know that it exists? And so that's sometimes the challenge, finding who has it, and is it widely available to be cited?
Yes.
So once we've talked a lot about the problem statement and how to formulate it, how to build it, how to end it. Once we really get that done, our next step in the proposal stage is really understanding, well, what are our goals with this, and what are our objectives that flow from that statement, and really build out what we're trying to do with this project, and what are the goals we're trying to achieve. And with these goals, what we're really trying to do is, convey the ultimate intent of the proposal. What we're trying to do is, what's the overall philosophy? It's kind of a concise statement of what the whole purpose of the project is, the goal of what we're trying to achieve. We have our idea, we have our problem statement of why we're doing it. Now, what's the goal of the project? which is what are we trying to achieve? What's really the whole purpose of the project? You know, in the case of the one in Chuuk, I mean, our goal was to, you know, change the minds of people at the Department of Education. You know, which is, you know, we're doing it, you know, by putting computer labs in with a different model than had been done there before. But their ultimate goal was to change their minds on, they had given up on computer labs because they had 2 bad experiences, but to, you know, show them a different model that could change their mindset, as an example. So an opening statement with this section, you know, begins with, well, the goal of this project is to do X. What is that X? And being very clear and concise, because it's really, it gets down to, the whole purpose of this project. What are we trying to do with this? Which is different than, our idea of what we want done, and different than the problem statement of what we're trying to solve. What's our end goal with doing all of this? So we have to have a well thought out project. And when we think out the project and the goals, that really helps us really formulate, the key things that we have to keep in mind, like, we also want to we don't want to have 100 goals for this either. We want to take the goals that we have for this and really raise it up to 1 or 2 key things that we want to achieve. And so that our reviewers reading it, they can see exactly, well, here's what they're trying to achieve with this project. The project in Chuuk that I keep citing, the goal is to change the minds of the Department of Education. And how we know that's successful is when they, budget funding to do this in more schools. And so while we'll achieve our short-term goals of actually putting labs in place, putting the computer network in place, and demonstrating it to them, those are short-term goals. The bigger goal may take 6 months to a year to realize. But that's the ultimate goal we're trying to get to. We still have our short-term goals of, stage 1, here's our goals to get the labs in place, stage 2 to get the network in place, stage 3 to get the content that the schools need in place. Those are smaller short-term goals, but the overarching goal of why are we doing this whole project, you're right, you may not get immediate results.
When we are talking about change in the development sector and change the mindset of a specific group of organizations or a ministry or a community towards some intervention from a development intervention, it can go to very complicated places. So that's why it's important when you start a project to have like a baseline information on how things were when you started, how the situation was when you started. Like, for example, they were not talking to each other, right? So after this project intervention, they talk to each other once a month. So that's an indicator that something is changing. It doesn't mean that they're friends now, but they're just improving that communication. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that sometimes progress is happening, it's just that we are not documenting it in a way that we actually can measure it. So if we take some notes along the way during the project implementation, we will be able to at least identify what the outcomes of the project are and what the perceived changes are. We understand, and I think most, if not all, the agencies understand that impact is something that you don't achieve unless it's a full cycle that might take from 3 to 5 years to actually do the whole change that you are expecting. But these things contribute to that change, and you can kind of monitor it through time. You just have to have the capacity to identify those changes and document them in a way that allows you to put together the analysis of what happened afterwards.
This is a relatively, small grant for $30,000. We're not going to change the world. However, the goal is to be a catalyst to start a change, to show people a new way of doing things, to have this innovative idea, have people, step back and, wow, that's, a new way of doing this, or I never thought of that, we should get behind that idea. And it's really to be the catalyst for that to happen. So while the goal may be loftier, may take longer to get to, the path that we're following to get there, we do have checkpoints to say, oh, guess what, those two agencies are finally talking with each other, something's going to happen. And I'm going to pick on Vanuatu, since our delegation's not here. When I was here in November... Oh, where's Jackson? Oh. Well, so you can plug your ears for a minute. But when I was here in November, I met with the regulator's office, the CIO's office, then went up and met with the department, or the Department of Education, and they to talk about what their plan is for ICT, and they put us in front of the guy that's running around updating Windows 7. He had no clue what their policy was, and he goes, I don't know anybody that has a policy. But now, I come back, and guess what? It sounds like the governor, the CIO's office, and the regulator's office are talking regularly with now the Department of Education, and they seem to be working on a plan moving forward. Where last November, I don't think they were really talking that much. So Jackson, did I say anything wrong? So, I could argue I was the catalyst that made that happen. I don't think I was, but you can see where, if that was my goal coming here, to be the catalyst to make that happen, well, guess what? Now it's happening.
Going back to what Bob mentioned about the role of NGOs, also we know that data collection and all, same communication with government offices and officials and ministries and things like that, that there are a lot of cases where the communication doesn't flow for political reasons. You are from one party and they are from the other. And sometimes when a grant opportunity arrives, or someone from overseas come and naively ask questions that no one dares to ask in the local environment because you're not supposed to ask them right and talk to each other or things like that. Things change and happen. So it's just to kind of provoke those spaces when those conversations might actually happen. So to go back to Bob's comment about data and the role of NGOs, in my experience, one aspect that has been very useful is to when NGOs identify data that is completely opposite, the numbers are saying completely different things as the ones that the government is publishing, and census or the research or whatever. Sometimes it's not that they are faking it. It's just that they are evaluating the data in a completely different way, and just having an honest conversation about what your database is, how are you collecting the information, how are you analyzing it, what questions are you asking to that data to be able to produce these reports, and then you identify that, the NGO is actually collecting different data from different sources in a different way, and they can actually start talking not about the data itself, not about, you're lying about this and you're saying everything, but actually the methodologies that can contribute to have a better understanding of the local environment. I just think that it's just as important as having the data. Is important to just have a one step back and not only considering that you're right. I have the right data collection, right? And what they were doing is wrong. Is that if they have the resources and you have some resources to do data collection, wouldn't it be better just to exchange and try to find out how to do it better in a more collaborative way? And sometimes it's not about the message that the data is going to give in the end, that there is X percentage of coverage or connectivity or coverage or literacy, or things that are very delicate because it makes look like the government is not acting or things like that. It's about going, it's not the attack from the attack from the NGOs to the government, but the NGOs offering assistance to the government to look, we are working on this, and it works. In the case of Colombia, we did 15 years ago, we did the first database that was collecting information on human rights violations in the country, and we supported the NGO that is a Jesuit organization that was collecting that data, and they put together, they had all that information in their NGO next to the university that they run, and we managed to help them out to put that database online. Next day, probably, that the data was online, the government came in saying, what is this? The information on violations of human rights is completely different from the one that we have. And we started comparing the databases, and it ended up being a collective database of 70 NGOs plus 7 departments of the government on different views on all the human rights violations. And all of them were right. They all had the right data. The problem was that they were not comparable one to another, and they you were able to read them completely separately and say something completely different from one data collection to the next. So sometimes it's just not about the message that you're going to pass through the data, like you're not active, you're not working, you're doing everything wrong, whatever, but it's just, if you're sharing the interest of getting to know better your own environment, it's better to have those conversations on how to collaborate instead of just attacking each other.
So, what we want to have is 1 or 2 clear goals of what the project's about. However, we may have several objectives related to that goal. And the key is our goal is the higher arching thing we're trying to achieve. We're going to do these certain objectives to achieve that goal. And so that's how we want to break it out. We have 1 or 2 overall goals for the project, but then have these objectives that are measurable that get us to that goal. And we want to have a methodology of steps how we achieve each objective. So what the grantor is looking for, and the thought that you put into this now actually makes it easier to manage the project for you to see how it's going, is what's our overall goal? What objectives do we have to have in this project to achieve that goal? And then what are the steps that we're going to take for each of those individual goals to make it happen? So, the objectives are those, I'll say those, our overall goal is to get to the top of the hotel, for example, but, our objectives means we've got, 52 stairs we have to go up to get to the top of the hotel. And so what's, the objectives actually state, in terms of what's going to be accomplished. Are we going to, tackle each stair as we go up that staircase to get to the top? So we may have a set of key deliverables, or what I'm calling objectives, to get to support that overall goal. So what we want to do is be able to clearly state what those objectives are and break them down into measurable pieces and the outcomes that can be measured for each of those. And so as we have our overall goal, in the case of the project in Inveneo, changing the mind of the Department of Education on computer centers in schools. What are our goals to do that? Well, what failed previously, understanding that is a goal. Second, how our new idea on how to do it better, how we're going to implement that, how we're going to get that into a school, how we're going to get internet connectivity to that school, what do we need to make that happen? And one of the goals of the project was local capacity building. How are we going to train the local partner, iSolutions, to be able to do this work. So those are, objectives supporting that bigger overarching goal. But what we want to do is take that goal, break it down into those pieces, those objectives, and then make sure that they're measurable so that we can track how the project's going. And also, midway, as Sylvia said, how they manage their grants is they pay out half and wait for that interim report to see how you're tracking to that bigger goal with those objectives. And are those objectives that you have measurable, and how many of those have gotten done? And if they're satisfied with the progress, then the remaining part of the grant is supplied. And a lot of granting agencies do that. They pay out not just one check at once, but they watch your progress and pay out over time.
Technical reports templates and financial reports templates. You can see what the grantees for 2011, used in the last time we had grantees. All the final reports are available for download on our website. And I'm currently finalizing the review of the templates for this year because we are doing more work on this evaluation and communication, research communication with this group. Is a project also funded by IDRC called DESI2. They are doing evaluation using a methodology called utilization-focused evaluation and research communications. So we are trying to incorporate that into the work we do on follow-up. So we are updating the templates, but you can see the templates they used before, and the next template is going to be available probably in a couple of weeks. Depends on the project. And also it depends on your administrative capacity. In a lot of the cases with small organizations, what we see is that they are doing all the equipment purchases at the beginning, so they need a bit more money up front at the beginning to do one big purchase for everything. So they don't have to do import and also things at different stages during the project. And then you see like the big expenditures come at the beginning basically, and then later on they are doing the training, the capacity building exercises and publications, things like that. But mostly you see big chunks of the budget expended at the beginning. But if your organization has the technical capacity and the administrative capacity to do that over a period of time, and you have you manage your projects using a milestone methodology, you just have to present that as part of the plan for the project. And when we sign the agreement, we determine what is going to be the first disbursement, and that could be first phase or phase 1 to 3. So it covers at least 6 months of the operation. And then after that we can see how it works for the rest of the payments. We just try to avoid too many payments to chase, because 3 is what we have now. 1 for the initial payment up front when they sign the contract, 1 6 months after, or halfway through the life of the project, because if it is a project that lasts only 3 months, it's a month and a half after they receive the first disbursement. That's pending the presentation of complete financial reports, technical reports. And then we keep a little portion at the end, 10% or 5% depending on the project, to make sure that they deliver the final technical report. So if you don't deliver the final technical report, you don't get the last 10% of the budget. That's our pushing mechanism to have all the reports in order.
Every project has its own particulars. I mean, a lot of the projects I work on are capital intensive, and 70% of the funds are spent up front just on capital equipment. Other ones use very little capital. When we're doing field survey, and that becomes more field intensive on the cost of having people out doing surveys. The project in Chuck, for example, is time bound because, Professor Osmond out of Chicago is an integral part of that project. Well, she only has from June to August off of school, so the majority of the work happens in those 3-month period. So it's kind of time bound, and she has students that she brings into the project, and they have their summer off, and that's the only time they can work on it to help with the project there. So it's not about the timing of costs or payments, it's more, the timing of availability of the people. So I think, the challenge that Sylvia has is she gets hit with projects that are capital intensive, that are people intensive, that are more time sensitive. And, it's hard to balance when do you pay what to do. So from a grantor, she's got quite a matrix she has to juggle all the time. And I know, in the projects and the proposals I write, they're the same way. They're all over the map depending on what the goals and outcomes that we're trying to describe for them. So what are these objectives and how do we, put these in place? Well, objective is really about the who, what, where, and when. Who's going to do what? When are they going to do it? How is it going to be measured? And that's what the granting agencies are looking for on all these objectives that are going to support the overall goal. Who, how, where, and when is it going to get done? And is it measurable at the end so that they can be reported on that? That objective's been completed, and we're moving closer to that, to our end goal. We also, it has to support, the desired end results of the project. So the goals have to be the objectives have to be closely aligned to the goals. But the objectives are not how those results will be accomplished, it's really the task and how to do it. The goal is, how we're going to accomplish them. So these are really action-oriented and usually start with a verb on, as I said, who's going to do something or what's going to get done. So these are action-oriented that are measurable. Is what our goal is that we want to achieve with our objectives. And we want to arrange them in our priority order. That may be a time order or it may be an importance order, depending on how you structure your response for grant. And in a research proposal, of course, objectives are a little less specific, but they still support the overall goal of the project, and that it's essentially sound. So, what's an objective? What's an example? Well, our goal, let's say, is getting people from Samoa and Fiji to interact more to improve their own economies. That may be our overall goal. Well, what's a objective to do that? Well, we're going to link the two countries with an undersea cable. What are we trying to do with that? What is, we're going to try to improve trade. We're going to do it within 5 years. Where it's going to be between the residents or the who, and we're going to measure each nation's economic indicators to see if they've increased inter-island commerce, and that's how we're going to measure it. So here's our goal, here's our objective, and here's the what, where, who, and how we're going to measure it. Here's a very high-level goal, our objective, how we're going to do it, and the what, where, and when, and how it's going to get done. So here's something anyone can read very easily, understand it, and understand what this project's about. Wow, and if you do understand that, that's good, because I woke up at 4:30 this morning thinking I didn't have enough examples.
Another.
I did it at 4:30 this morning, so. So I wanted to have an example of where objectives fit in to support a goal, just to give you an example. If we're doing research, of course, the objectives are a little bit different, which is, really looking at how do we find new generation of information. We may have a hypothesis that we want to research or questions, and it's generally, the objectives are short. An example of that may be, determining the impact of internet access of women on the Isle of Vanuatu. We're going to research, somebody put internet there, we're going to go see what the real impact was with women. So we need to identify, an example. Our goal is determine the impact. We're going to identify the needs of women based on communications, information, economic health, family, to see what the impact of the internet is. But this is a little bit more research goal. Well, the other key thing with goals and our supporting objective is we need to know the methodology. Okay, how are we going to do that? What's the steps we're going to take to achieve that? Like the example, the goal of finding, we're going to improve economics between two islands. Well, our objective is, we're going to put in a table to link the two and see how that increases e-commerce. Well, how are you actually going to put that table in? So the methodology of how is what approach are you going to take to actually make that thing happen. And so that really becomes a plan of action, project design or methodology. What steps are you going to take to achieve those individual objectives? And so this is usually, an area that's allotted, quite a few points if somebody can, within the granting process, if they, here's our idea, here's who we're going to impact, but now here's really the steps we're going to take to achieve those objectives. And this is where a thought-out plan gets a lot of points in there, where, a poorly written one or one that's missing altogether and how you're actually going to achieve it isn't going to do well in front of the reviewers, because they want, wow, great idea, they're going to make a good impact, but nowhere tells me how they're going to do that. Or they haven't thought through, this is really a lot, how they're going to do that. So once again, looking statistically, 2 out of 5 proposals are turned down because they didn't have a sound methodology of how they're going to approach the individual objectives and how they're going to break down and do each of those steps realistically. Once again, who's going to do it, what is going to get done, and how we're going to measure it. Discussion to have with the granting officer to see if they want to get to that level of detail or just have a narrative on how you're going to do it. Because a highly complex grant chart they may not have time to review. One that's a higher level, yes. Or they may say, no, give me a narrative and tell me, the who, what, where, and when of each objective. So once again, that conversation will help.
Fixed to any particular project management methodology. We can use whatever they use normally in their organization that is something that they understand and they are comfortable using. So no need for logic frameworks, no need for Gantt charts. It could be something simpler or more complex if it fits your administration processes. What we expect is that by the time you are ready to prepare the technical report, you are able to translate that information into something that is digestible or readable by someone that is, again, outside of your organization and doesn't have all the details on how to run things. If a Gantt chart is what you actually need to express that plan to function, it's fine. If what you need is a a list of steps is fine with dates or without dates, just saying month 1, month 2, or it doesn't really have to be that complicated. In some cases where we have, for example, in the lobbying for change of laws, that you have a very, very interesting timeline on where and when those discussions take place, so it can actually give you, the day, the time, the hour, the place, everything that is going to happen. But in a lot of other initiatives, it's kind of like a list of activities that are going to take place in a particular time frame.
So the methodology, of course, or what we're calling the project design or plan of action, often becomes the most detailed part of the and lengthy section of your submission, because you are detailing, here's the, to reach my goal, here's 10 objectives now, here's the who, the where, the when, and how I'm going to measure that objective and get each one of those done. So it becomes typically the longest section in your response. And it includes those specific activities, to support those objectives. What, the what, where, who, and how you're going to do each one of those items. And it's very task-oriented, of course, and specific to detail. So it's where you demonstrate, all the steps that are going to be needed to complete the project, how they flow logically between each other, from one step to the other, one objective to the other. So, as the grant grant agency is reading this, of course, what it should do is walk your reader through the project on how you're going to approach it, what steps you're taking, who's going to do them, and the order that they're going to get done. And this is why I say it's a little bit more of a narrative than just, well, here's the Gantt chart of what we're going to do. It talks through and describes each of those and how they relate, how each of the activities relate to the objectives. And it also develops a timeline or the organizational chart of what's happening. So, once again, a Gantt chart may fit or it may be too detailed. That'll be your call on the specific grant agency and what they're looking for. Most of them do ask for a separate timeline on how you're going to approach the project and where those individual objectives fit within that timeline. The other question they always ask is, how are the activities being conducted? And this is what they're thinking when they're reading them, and this gets back to the when, how long is it going to take, who's going to do it, where is it going to be done, and what facilities are going to be used to accomplish it. So if we can achieve those in our narrative, then they can get a full understanding of the objectives, the methodology, the flow that you've put in place for this, and can see how it relates up to the bigger goal. But once again, this will be the more detailed, longer section of your proposal. But once again, if we can break it down into our problem statement, what our goal is, and then break our goal down into these individual objectives, it becomes manageable to get done. The other area that's always asked for, of course, is switching from methodology and activities and goals and objectives. Who are the people involved, and what information do we need to supply? And so it's always key because projects are always made up of people. And so, who are the people in this project? And the question the grant is asking, why should we give them this money? What's the background of these people? And so it's, this is where you can demonstrate that you're the right person or your team's the right team to do the project. I apologize for the small font. And simply do not say "see resume." That's what Sylvia said earlier. Put a narrative of who that person is, very short. You can have a resume as a backup document, but never say, "Go and see the resume," because it's not going to happen. And some of, I don't know if any of you have ever seen an academic's resume. When I first started working on these project with academics, I'd ask them for their resume, and I'd get a 24-page CV, and it's like, wait, I didn't ask for a book. You have a 2-page version. No, it's 24 pages. Every paper they published, every time they cited in the press, everything's in there. And it's like, well, can you give me a 1-paragraph summary? No, here's the 24 pages. So, I had to summarize, well, okay, they're a professor at this university, they teach that. That's enough. So, once again, just don't say simply "see the resume." You need to put a short narrative on the key people that are in your project. And, and you're trying to convince the agency that you're able to accomplish that, or your team is able to accomplish what you say, and the resume gives the proof that you've got experience in that area, or you've got the capability, the team has the capability to do that. And the whole goal of the qualification section of the people is to show that confidence that that you or the team you've put together can do that. And what you want to do is highlight their experiences. Once again, you don't want a whole resume. You just want a paragraph on each person and their experiences and how that applies to that project. Once again, a narrative of their skill set, what they do, and the value that they're going to give to the project. And, make sure you've included your experience of managing other projects, because as the project lead, the ones putting their name on the paper that you're going to be responsible for those funds, they're going to want to know that you've got some experience in these areas. And so, if you have some weak qualifications or inexperience, you may want to add specialty experience, or I don't want to use the word appropriate consultants, but you may want to find subject matter experts that you can pull in to help with certain parts of the project in areas where there were gaps. But it's all about pulling the right team together.
Try to include women as team members of the project in decision-making positions of the project or technical aspects of the project, not only as the secretary doing the reports for you. It will be, well, we don't have much of those cases actually, let me think. I guess it would be good to have the information about the specific company that you are having in mind. And when you report back, have information about how you're tracking the progress, like with the agreements you have in place and things like that. But one thing that I would recommend is that even if someone else is actually doing the work, the narrative behind it is that you have ownership and you know what's going on, and it's not the technical reporting can be, for example, just get a template and then copy and paste the report from the consultant. It has to have a narrative that shows that your organization is benefiting from the knowledge gained through the process, not only getting the service or the application that you hired these people to do.
So our project partner had the same opinion. He's like, oh, girls aren't interested in this, they're not interested in computers, and we can't have any, we don't have any women coming in asking for jobs, and they're not coming in, because he also runs a small internet cafe that has 5 stations. He's like, yeah, it's just the men that come in and use the computers, and so we were holding meetings at his office, and we would go out and take a picture of what the people were using. Well, most of the time it's Facebook. But 3 of the 5 chairs were always filled with girls. And so after we showed them the pictures, it's like, wait, here's what you told us, but here's what we have pictures of. Well, it was just that day. Well, guess what? We did it every day for a week, and the pictures didn't change. It was always 3 girls to 2 guys that were sitting there, you know, getting Facebook and email. So we changed his mindset to where when we went to do our training, we said, you know, you need to recruit women. Don't say you need 3 men to go and do this. Say you need 3 people, women invited. And he got, you know, 1/3 of the applicants were women. And he just was blown away. Because he didn't think they were interested. And just how they worded things excluded women. You know, the other, you know, but it is difficult. And I'll give an example. The project that I'm working on now in Ethiopia is funded by the U.S. government. The project has a gender requirement that women are included, and we're supposed to have half the people working on the project are women. So we had to go out and survey 32 different teacher colleges, which is spread across the whole country. You know, which would, in some cases, you have to fly to get there. Other cases, it's a 8 to 12-hour car ride just to get to one of the schools. And so we recruited survey people, what we call enumerators, to go out and do these surveys, and we trained them. Well, when we recruited, we only got we got 1/3 women. But the other challenge was for a woman who's single traveling alone in Ethiopia is not a good thing. It's very dangerous because single women are abused by the male population, horribly. And so we actually had to team them with a male counterpart so they could do their job. And it was funny because we went back to the funding people and said, we can have, you know, 1/3 of these people be women, but we've got to fund an extra person to go for their own safety. And we had a big argument about, well, do we want women going out and doing this and showing that they can do the work? Or, but we have to, you know, we're not going to send people out that it's not safe. And so finally convinced them, yes, they needed to spend the extra money. And the women were actually really excited to be able to go out and do that work because they were always excluded before. So in my company, Inveneo, we have a policy, especially in our engineering group, to, you know, hire women. And the problem is we can't find them. That there's not enough trained resources in engineering. And as soon as we find one, train them, they get offered double the pay and they go somewhere else. And that's been a real challenge, I know, for our company to keep women on staff because they're a valuable commodity. Especially in the United States where people are trying to bring women up to par, equal level in all areas in the labor force. So in our case, it's really hard to find, you know, a woman engineer that's willing to get on a plane and fly to you know, Kenya and climb up a pole. And as soon as we find one that'll do that and train her, she gets hired away by someone else that can double her salary. So we've got a good track record when we find someone and training them. We just have a bad track record to actually be able to retain them for those financial stuff. So, but I agree with Sylvia. You know, in most places, women are overlooked in their skills and capabilities of how they can be on these projects. And it does take a little bit of effort, but if you can break a few barriers, such as what we've done in Chuck, we really can change people's minds that, wow, there is a labor force of women that want to do this kind of work and are eager to do it. They just want to have a chance. So, in our key personnel section, you know, once again, you know, we want to highlight, you know, what those people have done or publications that they've written, evidence of their training or certification or clearance that's specific to this project. And that's the other thing, when we're writing that little 1-paragraph summary of the key people, we want to relate it back to the objectives or the goal of the project and where they have experience, not the 24-page resume an academic may have. That doesn't help. and, or if they're unpaid, published papers, or any experience they've had in this, or as a subject matter expert. We also want to do the same thing with your company or the institution you work for, or an institution that may be a major part of this project, and what's their qualifications, and do a little resume on them, or that one paragraph, and why are they qualified to do this, what's their background, do they actually have maybe a grants office that can help run this. So if you team with a larger institution, they may have resources, and if you're going to use some of those resources, here's the place to actually put it in place. So you really want to highlight that institution's capability and the relationship to the project. If it's the University of the South Pacific, we don't need a whole narrative of what that university is and that it has so many different colleges and departments, but how does it really relate to the project and where are they helping? Or what facilities are they going to supply? If it's an in-kind donation, support, library, computer lab that they may lend to the project. What is their capability and what are they supplying in relationship to the project? Once again, if it's something like the University of the South Pacific, we don't need a whole page on who the university is. Just where are they related to the project? Another area is evaluation and reporting. And we talked about that earlier. And so one of the things that granting organizations are going to want to know is how are you going to evaluate the project? And once again, this gets down to those objectives and how are they measurable, those individual objectives, and how are we going to formulate evaluation of those objectives to know whether it was achieved, whether it was successful or not, and how that individual objective happened. So, and we can use this for the project to evaluate as the progress goes on. Just as Sylvia mentioned, they want to see a midterm report on the project to get the next round of funding. So it's really reporting back, okay, we've received this we've done this objective, here's what was measurable, and here's what the outcome was. And makes it very easy then if we outline that in the proposal, they know what objectives that we're trying to achieve and what the measurable result of that objective should be. So thinking these through when we're doing the grant process then helps after the process to track how the project's going. So in that evaluation, we want to have a summation of the evaluation of all the objectives. And of course, this is where Sylvia talked earlier, where there's a standard reporting form that they like to see. And every granting agency will have their own approach on how they want to see the information on how the activity went, how the project's going, how the specific objectives have been attained, and the result of the objective. So the summation is really how the project's being evaluated and how each of the objectives have been finished. So it may take a little bit of design to come up with the right evaluation. What method are we using for evaluating each objective? What was the impact? How can we determine, okay, we've achieved this one objective, what was the impact? How's that impact and affect the overall goal? And a description of how we've kept track of whether it's a survey, an assessment, or the spending on that objective to show that it's been completed. And, consider that objective, whether it was, how do we measure whether it was successful or not? Also, we want to be able to, document this so if someone wants to replicate it, they would know, what to expect from when they complete that objective. Because, in the goal of a lot of these projects, it's a demonstration or it's a pilot or it's a research, and we want other people to benefit from it and having tightly defined objectives and a way to measure them, and a methodology to measure them is critical, and being able to document that so someone else can learn from that or duplicate that project if they'd like to do that. And what form should be used to for that information? And so, how do you want to put that evaluation report together? Sylvia's made it quite a little easier for us, as they have a predetermined form to do that. Other funders, you're on your own, but in most cases they do have a form that helps guide us on how they want to see that interim report and final report on how we've done. So the questions that are going to be asked, of course, is the kind of questions we may want to ask is in the evaluation to see how things are done. So I use this as a, what's the evaluation criteria for this workshop? What's the, we want the formative information such as who participated, was the workshop organized, was it attended as planned, what materials were made available to the attendees, were they of high quality? Well, if we overlook a couple of my slides this morning, was the full range of topics actually covered. So, the goal of, the overall goal of this workshop is to get more submissions of proposals for the Pacific Islands. The objectives of doing it were, running this workshop, and how are we measuring whether the workshop was effective is, did you get the right people to participate? Was the workshop well organized? Was it attended with the people that we wanted to have attend? Were the materials available? Was the quality there? Did they cover all the topics that were needed? Were there too many topics? Too few topics on grant writing? Were there problems? So if we look at the questions to ask, even if we use our workshop here as an example, you can see how it's very easy to come up with a methodology, the type of questions to ask to see if the objectives were obtained, if they supported the larger goal of the project, and are these things measurable? We can measure, we have a list of who participated. We know what materials were available. We can see what problems occurred. And, is there any modifications that should be done to improve it? So, and how are we going to capture that? And how was the timing of the workshop? Was it well timed for, to finish, to get a grant submitted? So it's, using our little workshop here, you can see how you can put an evaluation design together, asking the right questions to find out if it was a success. So Sylvia, you don't need to use this, but...
That would be great if you can use it. That would be fantastic. Just wanted to emphasize this work on the utilization evaluation that we are going to start doing, what we are doing. The idea behind all this is that no matter what evaluation methodologies you use, if you use logic framework, if you, whatever methodology or whatever you want to call it, this formative, summative, results assessment frameworks, whatever you want to use or your organization is comfortable using. What we would like to see is that your evaluation efforts related to this project, or the projects to be funded by ISIF.Asia, are conducted in a way that you are actually going to use the results of that evaluation. That's why it's called utilization focused. It means that If you can't evaluate the full extent of your intervention, of your project, but you choose to evaluate only one component of that project, for example, if it is to get more women involved in this, and you choose to evaluate only that, that's all we need to know. As long as with the results of that evaluation and your understanding of what the problem was, and you're going to do something about it afterwards. What we don't want to see is technical reports and evaluation reports that are shoveled into a drawer and nothing happens. Because we are going to promote your reports through our network of donors and contacts and sponsors, and try to help you out scale up your initiatives and grow. But you also have to grow, and you have to learn through the implementation of the projects that you're doing. So the challenge that we are trying to face now is like a lot of the donors are asking for a full extent on the evaluation of every single thing that happened in the project. And if you actually really want to do that, you need to actually allocate money towards evaluation in your proposals. And that would be fantastic if you can do full reviews and full evaluations of all the work you do to make sure that everything is totally understood and perfect and whatever. Fantastic. But that might not be possible or realistic to achieve. So if you decide to concentrate only in the aspect that you consider that is the most critical aspect of the proposal, to make sure that you actually learn something through the project, that's fantastic. That's what we want to see. Because what we want to see is that you are able to articulate and communicate your learnings from that experience into communications products. Could be little books, big books, whatever it is, flyers, infographics, websites, whatever it is, to document what you're doing and to leave the message of what the project was all about, the situation that it was, somewhere, for other people to learn and stop doing all this assumption that nothing is happening and no one knows and we don't know each other. And maybe that's not true. Maybe it's just a matter that the communication is not open and that the communication products are not there for people to actually see what you're doing. So we're trying to kind of break that cycle and help ISIF.Asia recipients to use evaluation as a tool for their own service, for their own good, and not for the good or for the service of the donor. So it's an approach that we are actually fighting really hard with other donors. They don't like it much, but we are not flexible on saying, oh yes, we are going to accept your funds and you're going to comply with all these crazy requirements on evaluation for everybody, because we know that's not possible, that's not reasonable, it's not feasible for a lot of people, and we actually require a lot of knowledge on evaluation skills that you don't have. And the other thing that we don't want to do, same thing with the auditors that I mentioned before, is we don't want to send an evaluator, an external evaluator on a parachute and land on your project and tell you everything you're doing wrong, because they were not there. They were not there when the decisions were made. They leave with all the photos and all the videos and all the evidence, and sometimes people at the project level never ever really get the results of those external evaluations. So we're not doing that, and we are trying to convince donors like the Swedish government to stop doing that, because it's just unfair for the people on the field doing that work. And fortunately, we are counting with the assistance of IDRC in this process. They are actually the ones testing this out and funding initiatives on utilization-focused evaluation, where you can actually see things happening more quickly because you're actually doing something with your learnings and your understanding of what happened with the project. And I'm going to send you another email with this link to this primer and the link to the author of the big book on utilization-focused evaluation and what we are trying to do. So from this round of grants, we are going to select out of all the recipients that are going to receive ISIF funding, there are probably going to be 10 or 8, from 8 to 10 projects. We're going to select 3 to receive mentoring on utilization-focused evaluation and research communications. So those 3 organizations are going to receive extra help to improve their evaluation skills and the research communication skills. And that's part of this call for proposals to have when people are granted the funds late this year, they will the projects will start implementation in 2014, so that's all for next year. But it's all about supporting projects on getting these skills. And great if at least one of those 3 projects is from Pacific.
So, it's the evaluation and reporting is an extremely important area, as you heard from Sylvia. You know, in the next round, they're going to actually mentor 3 different recipients on that. And it's a difficult area. You know, when things go wrong with a project, it's hard to report those. And, you know, but communication is the best approach. And even the project in Chuck was quite interesting. I'm going to go off on a little tangent here. We, you know, trained the local capacity. There was a gentleman who was supposed to go out and check the school, the ones that had the pilot in place, and make sure that they had any problems. Are they using the computers? Is there, you know, do the teachers need to be shown to do something? One of the schools, the first one we did at UDOT, when we went back, we installed in August, we went back in February and found out they weren't using it. And, well, why? Well, you know, we didn't know how to do this, and the guy never showed up. Like, what do you mean the guy didn't show up? It shows he came this month, this month, this month. He goes, he never came. And, you know, we had to report that back, and everybody was, the project was upset. Well, we can't tell people that nobody's used this computers for 5 months, you know, they're going to be, it makes the project look bad. We can't do that. Well, you know, we have to, you know, but that's what happened. But what was interesting, of course, and we did report that, and people caught that, and you know, we had, you know, the explanation of why it happened was silly, because one of the schools had a Peace Corps volunteer, and the local Chook guy went there first and never left there. He would spend the day there, and the next day, and the next day, and then he would come back, oh, I've made my rounds. So the other places, they never checked that and didn't know if there was problems or not. You know, how do you report that back to your donors? Well, the one guy, you know, was supposed to go check on it, you know, had a crush on someone at the other school and never went anywhere else. So, you know, those things, you know, but that's the reality of the project. Well, you know, but we reported it and we talked about it and, you know, blogged about it and put it in our reports and, you know, told people what happened. And, you know, and it was funny because here I come to Vanuatu. I had lunch with the Peace Corps mission director here on Wednesday, and he's like, you know, well, we want to do more with computers in schools here, and how can the Peace Corps support that? And he goes, have you heard about the solar computer lab in a box they're doing up in Micronesia? I goes, yeah. He goes, why does it take so long for the teachers to use it? And I had to explain the story about the guy that, you know, had a crush on one of the Peace Corps workers there and didn't make it back to that school ever again. So he understood, but it's just funny how, you know, you need transparency, and it makes for a good story later on. So we've fixed that. We've got a different person that's going out and checking on the system now. He's married. Hopefully that makes a difference. So using our little example again here, if we want to look at the formative questions and then the summative ones, did the attendees change their grant practices? Are they going to submit more grants, or did the characteristic change by island? One certain islands react better to the training. Island people react to the training different than others. So, these could be kind of evaluation design questions. If we just look at our little workshop here, what was the success? As Sylvia goes back and talks to the funders, yes, we had all the formative, methodology for evaluation, and here's our summative results. But these are what we have to think through, because all these granting agencies want to see how are you going to evaluate the success of their money you're spending, is what it gets down to. We've given you this money, we've entrusted you with it, now evaluate how your project went and how the impact our money has made. And as Sylvia said, it isn't always about just reporting back to her. She needs that information to go back to her funding agencies to make the case for the next year and to continue this kind of work. So it's important, it's a very important step both from the grantee and the grantor to make sure that good evaluation is done, that we do the formative part, that we do the summative part of evaluations, and that we use the right methodology there. Oh yeah, I had a couple more in here. Did the teacher use up-to-date information? What obstacles prevented implementation change? So these may be things that, from a summative standpoint, we get from the formative questions. Our last one I had on there, were there changes made to improve the curriculum? Well, I tried to do that this morning. And were the students interested in more classwork afterwards? So what's a good evaluation plan? One that covers both the process of what we're trying to do and the product or the deliverables that we're trying to achieve. It tells who's going to perform the evaluation and how they're chosen, what role they're playing on the team, and defines the criteria that the program will be evaluated. What's our methodology that we're using for our evaluation? And it shows that it evaluates the achievement of each of those objectives. So as we define our goal and the supporting objectives, how are we going to evaluate the success of each objective? And describes how we gather the data of how successful each objective has been. And it explains the instruments, tools, or questionnaires, or what we use to do that assessment or the evaluation. Whether did we use any tools, did we use any questionnaires or other material to show how we achieve that goal. Any questions? It's an important part in the process, as I said, somewhat in summary, because it tells Sylvia how the project's going, how we're achieving each objective and its success, and then she turns and uses that, for her funders. So it's just not us reporting to her how the project's going. It really allows her, giving her the tools to do her job, which is bringing additional funding in to her organization. So we have to realize what we're doing does affect a lot of other people, and how good a job we do here is going to make a difference. Not just to our project, but to other projects. And the last piece of this then, if there's any data analysis that was done of the results, what was done, how did we do that? When we talked about our evaluation plan, we also have project reports that we're going to have to do along the way, and so we need to plan time for those to happen. And This is one area where most projects don't plan time to get done. As Sylvia mentioned, she withholds funds at the end to make sure she does get a report, because most people don't plan for this. But if you build that into your proposal, they can see you thought through it, that time and effort's going to be needed to do a report. So what you need to identify, of course, is what's going to be reported, whose audience are you writing the report for. In a lot of cases, it isn't just for the grantees or the grantors' consumption. It's also a report that you want to be able to share out with a larger group, such as in Chuk. Our report we want to share with the Department of Education to influence them. But we also want to show it to other groups within the Federated States of Micronesia to show the results we've had, and hopefully help and work with other people in either YAP or in Ponape that want to duplicate the project. So a good report on how the project was carried out, what worked well, what didn't work well, what results we had is critical. So the audience is larger than what you normally think it can be. And then how are we going to do that? Well, with today's tools, of course, whether it's via email, whether it's videotapes or on YouTube, there's lots of different mechanisms to report out that information to different people, and we have to plan for that. Or maybe presenting at a conference, or having published in a journal, or maybe just on the project website or in a blog. But we need to plan for those, plan for the time it's going to take, and who we want to get that message out to. So in our proposal, we just want to make sure that we include a plan on how we're going to do our reporting and our structured reporting, and answer those questions on how we're going to get that information out there. Another important thing, once we've got done with our proposal and we want to submit it, is it review friendly? Is the reviewer going to get this and say, oh my gosh, 500 attachments, it's a book, there's no way I can review this. So how do we make it more friendly for the reviewer? Because as Sylvia's mentioned, she gets so many submissions, and what makes one win and one not? And a good piece of it is, well, if someone's reviewing it, is it reviewer friendly? And so there's just some common things to think about, which is the reading style. Is it readable? And that really helps if we have our third person or a friend that can read this, and if they can understand it and it's clear to them, it's going to be clear to the reviewer. So can actually, I'll say from a high level, scan it, understand what the idea is, what the problem statement is, what the goal is, see what the objectives are. If we can scan, if it has scannability and has the flow that they want in their format, that's going to help it move closer to the top of the file. So we need to look at each introductory section, because some people do scan, okay, we've got 8 major sections, did they address each one? They may scan just the first sentence as they're going through the whole pile to say, okay, here's one I'm going to read further, here's one, it doesn't look like they get it at all. And what we want to do is be able to, as they're scanning the submissions, that ours stands out. So when, once we're done with it, we want to, just do that as a draft and set it aside for a day and come back and reread it. Because sometimes when you're too close to something, you can't see, you're assuming logic in there that you haven't actually written. And you want to take a step back and set it aside for a day and then come back to it and revise it and see how you didn't word things properly. Once again, have someone else read it that doesn't know about the project. And then have them, tell you what the project is about. So if they can read it and then take the paper away without notes, and they can tell you what they read and what they think the project is about, and if they can convey back to you what you've written, then you've done a good job. If they, if they convey something back different than what you expect the project is, well, some more editing is going to be needed because the ideas haven't come across. And so once you get that feedback, of course, then you can edit for clarity, you can edit for conciseness, and, so that your ideas are coming across in a clear method, and it'll make it much easier for the grant reviewer to do their job. And of course, once again, let's cut down on the jargon. Make sure you know who your reader is and what jargon they know. In the case of ISIF, it's an ICT funded based project, so they're going to get the ICT lingo. But if you start getting into a lot of lingo in education or healthcare or another area that ICT is related to your project, they may not get that. So just remember, minimize or cut down or have no jargon. And once again, no first person. So what we really want to do is write in plain English. And grant writing is a form of both creative and technical writing. And my education background is an engineer. I worked in the IT industry for a long time. My writing style is very technical. But grant writing, while it is technical writing, it is also, there's a creative flair to it. And I'll be the first to admit, my proposals are pretty dry when you first read them. And have to go back and really figure out how I got to get my passion for that project into the grant proposal. But sentences have to be in logical sequence and use the action verbs of what are going to get done. And once again, not written in the first person. And don't be afraid to use lists if you have several things and highlight those lists, because it's going to make it easier for the reviewer to scan that and get those ideas out. And use what we call the active voice. Action verbs, active voice, which are, avoid the kind of things such as to be, more active voice, and subjects first. Use parallel construction, avoid noun strings. I'll say, from my education and going through engineering school, looking back at my career, I did a lot of great projects, but they all had to be documented. I sold, a lot of good ideas, but if I couldn't document those and put those in front of other people, those ideas never went anywhere. And unfortunately, or fortunately, writing is a critical part of proposals as well as it is in communication in our society today. So, these are all, no matter what we write, these are all good things that we need to know. And go on a witch hunt, meaning let's avoid words like that we use repetitively throughout the whole proposal, like the word witch. And avoid openers that are, things like there are, or this is, or trying. Once again, let's be active, subject first, and use action verbs in those sentences. So, the fact is, of course, what we don't want to have happen is it's an hour before the grant's due, and the internet goes down, and all that hard work that we just put in is for nothing. So once again, let's plan our schedule, look at the due date, and let's not wait till the last minute, because something's going to go wrong if you do. And I'll confess these things have happened to me, and so what we want to make sure is that we plan accordingly, we get writing done, we get people to review it, and we get an early submission, so we're not banging our head on our desk that we've done something silly and the last minute nothing, it's not working. So leave enough time. So remember to get ready, read all the requirements, follow the guidelines, and of course, don't contact the program officer and talk about your submission and what you're trying to do, and make sure they see the fit within their guidelines. And but always remember, we don't always write the perfect proposal the first time, and that we can recycle that proposal. And so sometimes the first time is a learning experience. So, you know, success means having 1 in 3 grants funded. So just realize it may take 3 tries before you get your funding, but if you stick with it and follow the guidelines, follow all the things that we've talked about here, eventually it will be successful. So, and once again, a rejected proposal doesn't always mean the idea was bad. And in most cases it doesn't. It just means there was a mistake or something you forgot to do. You didn't match your ideas with what the grant was about. So there's always a case that we can get the reviewers' comments, understand what we could have done better, which area we missed something, and resubmit the next round and do a little bit better job. And once again, contacting, not calling the program officer and finding out what went wrong and or what changed will help. So, but once we've written it and get those comments, it actually becomes easier to rewrite it, revise it, and resubmit it. Because the majority of the work's been done, we just need to tighten up a few different areas or see what we had forgotten to do. So don't despair. I went through the same thing applying for my first grants. My success rate was really bad until you figure out the formula and you keep at it, and then your success rate goes up. So of course the biggest mistake of all is, what's the number 1 mistake you can make? Not to write a proposal at all. So they learned something. Yay! So, well, thank you for your patience in the last minute.
Before he left, and is that even if you don't have things perfect, please apply this time. We don't know if there is going to be a next time. We never know. Founders can change their minds, things can happen, so we don't know if there is going to be a next call for ISIF.Asia. Okay? This one is open, so don't miss the opportunity and apply before the 9th of August. Please email me your questions and I will try to address them and help you out. But don't wait till the next time.